This is probably the most challenging session of the conference, since it is the last afternoon of 3 days of a lot of presentations. So I appreciate your attendance and interest. I think we have a very interesting group of speakers this afternoon, very international. So we have first up a Dutchman, second up I think is an American, and third up is a professor from the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. And if your geography lessons of Europe extended that far, Slovenia is in a southern part of Europe. So very interesting group of people, all with a very strong academic background. They're all professors. And the main theme of this session is really about learning cultures, learning styles, and indeed the first presenter, Professor Poell from the University of Tilburg in the Netherlands, is going to talk about learning development and individual learning in particular, and the use of social networking and the new technologies. This for me is a great topic. As I mentioned briefly in my presentation for those of you who were here before, I think the emergence of technology and social networking techniques is one of the most important drivers of learning and knowledge sharing in the modern world. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Rob has got to say. Just a brief introduction on Rob. As I said, he's a professor at the University of Tilburg in the Netherlands, full professor of the Human Resource Development Faculty, and that's a picture of me by the look of it, and the Department of Human Resource Studies. I think it's also interesting to observe Rob is tall, as you can see. I spent a year and a half working in the Netherlands. I have many Dutch friends, and I used to consider myself being reasonably tall, being 1 meter 83, but I'm short when I arrive in the Netherlands. So, Rob, over to you.
Thank you. I am tall, I can't help it. First, I would like to thank the conference organizers for putting on this wonderful conference. I feel very welcome in Korea. It's my first trip here. Thank you also for inviting me to be part of this series. It's called the Legend series, so I feel really important now, being already a legend. Let's see what happens there. So today I will talk about individual learning in the context of social networks. I will not focus too much on the technology side of social networks. The way I look at social networks, this is all about bringing people together in whatever means, by whatever means. And if they want to use technology to further that, to improve that, that's wonderful, that's fine. But I see that as just a means and not a goal in itself. So I won't pay too much attention at that side of social networks. The aim for today is to present a perspective, my perspective, and that of my co-author, Vert van der Krocht, also from the Netherlands, which is a perspective on learning and how learning is organized. We have worked together for a long time, actually, on what we have called the learning network theory. So again, you see the word network appearing there. Many publications already. But we're still developing these ideas, and for this particular conference, I'd like to focus on this issue of individual learning in the context of social networks. This learning network theory and the perspective that I'm presenting will be one that starts from looking at the employee's perspective. So I think of learning as something that takes place in and by an employee. Of course, HRD people, managers, and other people in organizations can do all kinds of things and shape all kinds of conditions for that learning to occur, but ultimately it is employees themselves who engage in learning, who have to do the learning. And I find it interesting to find out how they do that, why they do that, in what ways, and of course also how they use the conditions available, how to influence the conditions that are available for them in order to learn. And that is where social networks comes in. So I start from an employee's perspective, and I should also mention that I use an actor approach. So I look at different actors in a company. I don't think of a company as one monolithic block where everybody thinks and feels the same. I think of an organization as an arena, a place where people with various interests and various ideas meet. Employees, managers, HR people. I also look at external actors like trade unions, professional associations. So all kinds of groups and individuals who all have their ideas about why should this company learn, why should people in this company learn, and how should that happen. So there is not one idea. There may be a dominant idea about that in a company, but it is contended, and there are various different ideas, and these different groups try to get their own views across as much as possible. So that is the way I look at organizations, at learning in organizations, just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. Okay. Can we go to the next? Oh. I can do that myself. So just to give you the outline of what I'll be talking about, it's this figure. The main area of interest is the learning path, which is this dotted arrow. I think of a learning path as something that an employee creates for themselves, an individual employee. And learning is a very broad subject, I think. It is a very broad thing to deal with. It does involve going to a seminar like this. It does involve going to training. But much more does it involve working on the job, learning on the job, taking on a difficult assignment, wrestling your way through it, learning by doing that, asking a colleague for help, going to the internet to find information, looking outside of the organization for other experience that might guide you. These are all learning experiences that people can organize for themselves. And there are many opportunities in an organization and also outside an organization for people to engage in learning opportunities. But it is up to people themselves to make sense of all these activities, to make sense of all these opportunities and to engage in them. And that is what I refer to as the creation of a learning path. And it looks really linear here, but the reason why I gave it a dotted shape is because it is far from linear. This is not a very explicit process, although some people will try to be more explicit, but it's not as explicit as HRD people, for instance, would like people to engage in learning. People usually do have ideas about where they want to go in their career, for instance, about why work is important to them, why organizations, their own organization is important to them. They might even think about certain themes that they want to specialize in, that they want to become better at. But that is usually as far as it goes. And we are happy as HRD people if people actually take that as a starting point and think, well, what kind of activity should I undertake in order to further my learning path? And of course it is up to HRD people, but also up to managers, for instance, to help employees make sense of their learning paths, because it is a very hard task on an individual employee to do that. But whether you like it or not, employees engage in learning all the time, and they have their own topics, they have their own ideas that they want to pursue. And they may be in line with what the company, in this case the management, wants them to learn about, going in that direction, but may also be not in line with that. And that is where it gets interesting, of course. So that is about the learning path. Now in the paper, I talk about 3 types of network that influence this individual learning path. So these are people and activities, conditions within the organization that impinge, that influence on this learning path. And the most important one really is what I refer to as the primary work process. It's here called the work network. This is really the primary work process. So just by engaging in work, in doing your job, you learn a lot. You can learn a lot. Of course, not all tasks involved in your job are equally interesting in terms of learning, but there is a lot of things to be learned there. So that is a very important area for people to draw learning experiences from. The second one is what I call the learning network, hence the learning network theory. And these are more HRD directed, HRD explicit activities. These would be education programs, training courses, mentoring relationships, supervision relationships, all things that are designed by HR people so that individual employees can learn. And this will result in intentional learning programs. So for a while, when people engage in an intentional learning program, their learning path will be colored, if you like, by this intentional learning program. It is supposed to boost their learning path. And of course, it will depend whether it will actually do that, whether it will boost the learning path. Because if people have taken their own initiative to go to a training course because they see the value of doing that, then it will actually boost, if it's a good training, what they do. But if it is their boss who sent them on the training course and employees themselves don't see the use of doing that, they will be in the room, they will go through the motions, but it will not boost their learning path. It will only probably turn them off learning on behalf of the organization, if that is the way it works in that organization. So it depends. But the central idea is that individual learning paths can be boosted by these intentional learning programs which come out of the learning network. There is a third network which I don't really talk about in the paper because it would be too much for one paper, but that is the HRM network, the Human Resource Management network. And this is really intended for people to further their careers. So we assume that all people are interested in furthering their own career within the organization, possibly outside of the organization. And again, they want to engage in all kinds of activities that will help them do that, will help them further their careers. So, for instance, job appraisal processes are organized in companies so that people can reflect on where is my career at the moment, how am I functioning in my job, what should I be doing if I want to become, if I want to get a different type of job. So this is one example of how people could use the HRM network to further their careers and to also inform their learning path, because it will mean that they will engage in some type of learning activity in order to further their careers. So this is the basic idea. Individual learning paths are informed by 3 types of social network in the organization. Now, the interesting thing, I think, is that these 3 networks, I will restrict myself to 2 later on, but in principle, these 3 social networks have very different dynamics. Other people are dominant actors in these networks. In some cases, it might be management that is the dominant actor who really calls the shots and influences what is happening. In other cases, it might be employees themselves who get more power. And in other cases, it might even be HR that is driving these networks. And of course, they still have to interact. So that is where trouble comes from in organization. And again, I find that very interesting to look at. Oops. Well, the basic idea of this network theory is that networks are organized using a cycle, a process cycle. Basically, networks are organized by groups of actors. So employees, managers, HR people, external actors might be involved as well. They get together to organize all kinds of processes. They organize activities, they organize processes. For instance, learning processes, if we talk about the learning network. So a manager might, for instance, say to an HRD person, can you design a training course, a training program? And he or she could invite employees to attend that program. That is a number of activities that these actors undertake together, and that results in a learning process. In our thinking, over time in organizations, these activities and processes take on a more fixed shape. They become structured because, well, that is just the way things happen in that company, and at some point in a company there is a need to actually put that on paper, to write policy papers about it, to turn it into protocols, to write job descriptions, for instance, for the trainer or for the HRD person. But also it results in expectations on the part of employees. Are they expected to be very rich in initiative themselves, or are they expected in a company to just wait and see what the manager has thought out for them? So it's also a cultural aspect, but we refer to these areas as structures because they they refer to areas in the network that become fixed over time. They take on a more fixed shape. And then what I find interesting is that these structures that have become in place over time then influence what these actors can do and cannot do. So they have created activities and processes and over time these structures, and then they can actually be limited by those, because if, for instance, the expectation on account of management is that it will tell employees what to do in terms of learning, well, then it is very hard for managers as employees alike to actually deviate from that expectation, because it is part of the structure, it is part of the culture of the organization. So of course these structures give all kinds of opportunities to people. They form all kinds of conditions that people can actually use, but it also means that other opportunities have not been put in place in that company. So there is a certain fixed way of doing things around there, and that's why it's hard to deviate from the way things are done in that company in terms, for instance, of the learning network. So basic idea, actors co-create processes and structures over time, which then offer opportunities but also limit the possibilities that people have. And if anyone has written Giddens's work on structuration, structure and agency, this is the basic problem that he describes also in that theory, that there is agency, people undertaking all kinds of actions in companies, and there is structure which is created by agency, but then it also limits the actions that people can take. So if you're interested in that thinking, you could read Giddens a little bit. So that's how networks come about, how they are organized. Of course, companies can differ to a large extent in the types of networks, in how these networks are organized, I should say. And in this learning network theory, we talk about 3 dimensions that organizations can differ on. There are 3 dimensions, and the first one is the vertical dimension, which talks about the relationships, which talks about the relationships between managers and workers. So I would say at the far end, at the top end of this dimension, there is a vertical situation where basically managers can tell employees what to do. That's it. Whereas at the lower end of that dimension, employees will have lots of opportunities for self-directed work or for self-directed learning, if we're talking about learning. So the initiative at the bottom end of that vertical dimension is totally with the employee, and a manager is really a coach that guides people in taking their initiatives. And of course, in between there are various opportunities as well. It's a dimension, and there might be organizations where, well, sometimes managers are more dominant in telling people what to do, and sometimes employees are expected to take more initiatives by themselves. So this is one dimension where organizations can differ. Second dimension is the horizontal dimension, which talks about the relations among workers, among employees. And if you go to the right-hand side of that dimension, the far end at the right-hand side, I would say we're looking at teams, teamwork, team learning, where it is really the teams at the collective level who decide what each individual should be doing. So teams, the collective, are dominant actors in that, at that end of the dimension. And again, if you go to the left-hand side of that dimension, it is really down to individuals within the team context to take their own initiatives. And they don't really have to take into account the fact that they are part of a team. It doesn't really play a big role. And again, there can be intermediate positions there as well. An interesting dimension is the third one, which is referred to as the external dimension. And it talks about the relationships of employees with external actors. The most important external actor in this thinking is the professional association. For instance, think of a medical doctor in a hospital. At the far end of this external dimension, so at the bottom left really of this figure, which is, I guess, where many medical doctors, certainly in academic hospitals, will be. These doctors are not really bothered by what hospital management tells them to do. They are interested in what the professional association, the medical association, tells them to do, which is located outside of the hospital, outside of the organization. And both in terms of what procedures this doctor should use, and in terms of what these doctors should learn, keep up with the new insights, which comes from the medical field, research and development. Doctors really look at the professional association, the professional field. They can't be bothered too much by what the management of the hospital expects them to do. And of course, this really causes a friction among the workers, for instance, in these medical situations, and the management of the hospital, because they both want to have a say in what happens in the departments of the hospital. But there are real power fights over these areas if you go to the far left-hand side of that external dimension. And again, if you go to the upper right-hand side of the dimension, this will be a situation where perhaps semi-professionals are not really bothered too much by what their professional association tells them, and there will be intermediate positions. For instance, an organization consultant could be more towards the center of this figure on the external dimension, because there is a professional field of organization consultants, but unlike medics, organizations of consultants cannot tell their people, if you do this, you're out. You have to take this course, you have to take this module, otherwise you cannot be part of our profession anymore. So that tells you that the profession of organization consultants is not as organized, not as strictly organized as, for instance, the medical associations are. So again, organizations differ on these dimensions. And the idea is that every organization can take a position on each of these three dimensions. So I look at this as a diagnostic framework to tell you a little bit about what type of organization we're dealing with. And mostly organizations, of course, these are ideal types. Mostly organizations will score high on one or maybe two of these ideal types, and maybe slightly on a third. I've never seen an organization score high on all three of them. That would be unlikely. So it tells you a little bit about what type of company we're talking about. Okay, let's go back to this notion of learning path. I've told you a little bit about these networks and the way they are organized and how they can differ in companies. So let's go back to individual learning paths. The definition of the learning path is a set of learning activities that are both coherent as a whole and meaningful to the employee. So it really is an individual thing to the employee. The employee makes sense of the activities that he or she undertakes and turns it into a learning path, which is partly just undertaking learning activities. It could also be reflecting on those activities, reflecting on the theme of the learning path, where to go next in terms of the career, in terms of the job. Those are all activities that are part of the learning path. So it's both about action and reflection on the part of the employee. But the crucial thing here is that organizations cannot decide, cannot really influence individual learning paths of the employees. It really rests with the employees themselves. The only thing organizations can do, like managers and HR people and colleagues, is create conditions in which employees operate, and then they might do things that are in line with what, for instance, management thought would happen. But perhaps it will not do that. That's another possibility. Okay, there are some relationships that we expect to be in place among the learning network and the work network. They are described in the paper in more detail. But this really draws on the ideal types that I showed you in the figure with the 3 arrows. But of course, at the center of that figure was another ideal type. If organizations score low both on the vertical dimension, the horizontal dimension, and the external dimension, you're right at the center of these 3 arrows. That is what we would call a liberal type of network, because individuals are not bothered by what management tells them to a large extent. They are not bothered by what teams tell them to do, and they are not bothered by what professional associations tell them. This is really the type of organizations that draws on individual initiative. It's still an organization. So, for instance, the example sometimes that I give is 5 or 6 real estate agents that have decided to form an agency, but each 5 or 6 of them, each one of them basically runs their own shop. They have one building, they have one agency together. They talk to each other about clients, but basically they have their own clients. So they have to acquire new clients, they have to learn the right things to work with these clients, and that's how they use each other. But it's very much down to individual initiative. They just use the resources available in their agency to inform their own individual learning. That is a liberal type of network. So, if we look at the relationships between work and learning in that type, which is the bottom 2 boxes, the top 2 boxes, we're looking at individual work by workers that we should consider to be entrepreneurial, who have very broad jobs. Think, for instance, of these real estate agents. The idea is that learning programs for these people, so these intentional learning programs, should be loosely coupled, will be very much individual based. So there has to be some connection between how work is organized and how these learning programs are organized if people are to benefit from these programs. The second layer, where it says programmatic work, is really the vertical ideal type. So this is the type of company that Mintzberg, for instance, referred to as a machine bureaucracy, where everything is protocolized, put into procedures, put on paper. Jobs are very narrowly defined, very specialized. Perhaps McDonald's would be a case in point. Everything happens exactly in the same way all over the world in a McDonald's restaurant. Very strong task division. Of course, the learning programs in this type of company will probably have the same characteristics as well. Learning programs will also be very centrally regulated and based on the competencies that are needed to engage in these very narrowly defined tasks. That is what works in this type of company, in this type of work. The third layer, where it says integrated work, is really about the horizontal ideal type. This is really where work and learning are integrated. So in the situation where teams can really decide on most anything that happens in the organization, this is usually a situation where work is really about solving problems, and not problems that have standardized solutions, but difficult problems, where you really have to dig into as a team, bring in people from very different disciplines to help you. And of course, that really is a way of learning already. Work and learning are very much tied together there. So it's organic and usually based on problem solving, solving very difficult problems. The bottom one refers to the external ideal type. So work there is very specialized, but it's specialized not in the way the vertical ideal type is, because the vertical ideal type is narrow, very simple tasks and very specialized. The difference is that external work networks are specialized but very difficult skills. So for instance, the medical doctors, heart surgeons, they are very specialized. They have a very narrow task, but it is a very difficult task. Not anyone can do that. It takes years of training to become a good heart surgeon. So professionals take part in that type of work, and it's based on a task differentiation by discipline. So heart surgeons are difficult. Sorry, that was a Freudian expression. They might be difficult, but I was going to say different types of medics from, well, other types that you might see in a medical hospital. Learning in that type of organization is collegial and based on, well, new work methods that have been developed by the professional field and that people really need to engage in if they want to stay within their job, if they want to remain part of that profession. So they have to acquire new work methods by going to continuing professional development, seminars, and that type of training courses, unless they want to lose their job as a medic, for instance. So here are some expectations about the way organizations have organized the work and what type of learning is likely to occur in that type of organization. So far, we've basically talked about structures, learning structures in relationship to work structures, but we're talking about people here. And of course, people contribute to these structures because they make structures over time. But people also have theories, they have ideas, and Argyros and Schoen have talked about action theories as a concept, which means values, norms, knowledge, skills that help people do their job. For instance, if it's a work action theory. They might also have a learning action theory, which is really about the norms that they have about learning. So should I be very rich in initiative when it comes to learning, or should I just wait and see what happens? Do I learn by doing, or do I learn by going to a training course? That is part of the learning action theory of every individual. Now, we've seen that these networks differ in terms of structure. But fortunately, I should say, actors do not always comply with these structures. Actors have freedom of choice, not unlimited, but they have a certain freedom of choice to act differently. Why do they do that? Because sometimes their action theory doesn't really fit with the structures that are in place. And it is also the only way in which structures can change. So if we're interested in changing organizations, we do need to look at action theories, because otherwise we don't understand how structures can change. And we are saying that structures change because people try to influence these structures by drawing on their action theories about work, for instance, and about learning. Now, my thinking is that managers, employees, and HR people can have very different action theories. For instance, about work. Managers on the whole like to have things pretty much controlled. I'm making a black and white picture here, of course. Whereas employees on the whole like to have some more leeway, some more slack, some more opportunities to do things their way. And HR people, they are on the brink between the two. They try to help managers, they try to help employees, so they have to work with all these people to, well, make sure good things happen to the company. But the basic idea is that they have different ideas about what should happen in a company, both in terms of work and in terms of learning. And sometimes they fight over it, sometimes they negotiate about it, and sometimes they can just collaborate very well. But all these modes of interaction can actually happen in a company. And it's basically down to the power relations within a company who gets the final say. Well, final not as in forever, but for a while. You will not be surprised that in vertical types of organizations, of course, managers and centrally coordinating units are very powerful actors. And in the horizontal type, it's teams that are really very powerful. And in the external type of organization, it is professional associations really who run the show. And in this liberal, in the center of the figure that I showed you, it is the individual person who really is the most powerful actor in that type of organization. So that tells you a little bit about who is going to have the best say in what will happen, but not the whole picture, because people do interact. Power structures can also change over time. Okay, what I try to show you is that when it comes to individual learning, creating individual learning paths by employees, at least two social networks are relevant. One is the work network, so the everyday work process that people engage in, from which they draw all kinds of learning relevant experiences. And the other one is the learning network, which is much more HRD driven, which results in intentional learning programs, from which people can also take all kinds of learning relevant experience that they can incorporate into their learning path. So individual learning paths are always employee driven. It is owned by the employee. It is affected by work experiences and by engaging in intentional learning programs. And it is informed by particular work and learning networks. So depending on what type of organizations you're in, for instance, a machine bureaucracy, you will have, as an employee, a limited set of options available to engage in a certain type of learning path. It is very hard to create, let's say, a professional type of learning path in a machine bureaucracy, because the lack of fit is too large, I should say. There is just a misfit there. You can change a little bit if you're in a machine bureaucracy. You can try to look for the boundaries of what you can change, but it would be too much to ask, for instance, for a professional type of learning path in that company. That just doesn't work. It's too much distance. A number of implications that I draw from this thinking. We read a lot in HRD literature about the concept of informal learning. And what I found out, if I think about this way of looking at learning and organizing, is that it really isn't a very useful distinction, formal and informal learning. Because learning is just learning. It is something that the employee does on an everyday basis. And of course, when we say formal learning, really what we mean is learning by an employee taking place in a formal setting. The organization more or less puts a stamp on it because it is part, for instance, of a training program that the manager asks the HRD person to organize. If that happens, then we call it formal. But we don't know what happens in that training course. We don't know if people actually learn the things that the manager has asked the HRD person to make a program on. People might learn all kinds of things during a training course. They might even learn that the only way to stay in their job is to sit there, pretend to learn what people want them to learn, and then go away and resume everyday work. So people learn all kinds of things. So that distinction is not really useful anymore if you start looking at learning from the employee's perspective, because it's all informal, basically. It does happen in different settings, of course. I've showed you that. What I should also clarify is the second point. We also think of organizations a lot as networks. Organizations are networks. But I think what I've tried to show today is that organizations are multiple networks. There are work networks, HRD networks, HRM networks, and probably dozens more. I've limited myself to 3 and actually to 2 today, but I've also tried to show you that the power differences in each of these networks can differ. And that is why I think an organization is an arena. It's not just one network where one person or one group calls the shots. It is something that is a constant negotiation, sometimes also collaboration, and sometimes outright fighting among actors. That is a reality of what organizations are doing if you look at them from the idea that they are various networks together. And of course we have to do more empirical work about how these networks are actually related. Final point is about this structure and agency point made by Giddens in his structuration theory. And really I think was saying that it's both. We need to take in both structure and agency to understand how individual learning paths come about, how people contribute to processes and to structures coming into place, and then how this structure that they have developed limits their opportunities in a certain sense, and how they can actually try to change that over time. Core question there, and again we need more empirical research about this, and we're working on it as well, is how do employees make sense out of all these learning opportunities? There are so many learning opportunities, even in a machine bureaucracy. There are many opportunities for people to learn. But what we don't know very well yet is how people do make sense of experiences in the work network, experiences in the formal learning network, experiences in the HRM network, and all these other networks that I haven't talked about. This is something that people manage to do, apparently, and that we really need to look into much better to understand it. And that's what I hope to do for the years to come. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. We've probably got a couple of minutes for questions, but let me start with one. I mean, I think it comes out of your implications, because you stressed a lot about the individual learning paths, but as you observe in your implications, and certainly my observation would be that most employees really struggle with what kind of learning should I be doing, what is most relevant and important to my career, where are the best learning opportunities. And particularly as organizations get more complex and career models get harder to define, what that says is that they need more guidance, they need more help, and I think their managers and others that have some responsibility for that need to understand it themselves in order to be able to guide the individual. So I'm just interested in your observations on that, because you brought it out as an implication.
Yes, it's a very good point. I mean, we have looked a lot at the last 10, 15 years in literature at for instance, self-directed learning and self-managing work teams. In some cases, that just meant that from day 1 to day 2, suddenly a team was an autonomous team without much preparation or training. And the same goes for self-directed learning. We tend to think of those things as from one day to the next, people can start acting very differently and taking all these initiatives and organizing stuff for themselves. But that doesn't work because they're not used to it. So guidance is crucial, I would say, in helping people make sense of their own path, their own career, their own job. So, point well taken.
Yeah, and I think it kind of relates to this broader idea of a critical skill is learning how to learn.
Absolutely.
And if you look at educational systems historically, I think we've taught people how to learn content things and repeat them through testing. But actually one of the most important life skills is learning how to learn.
Yeah. I refer to that as strategic learning.
Strategic learning.
Not strategic on behalf of the company, but strategic on behalf of yourself.
Absolutely.
Going towards this broad aim that you have for yourself.
Yeah.
And usually it's not much more than a broad aim, because it is very difficult to lay out that path.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Any kind of burning questions? We want to keep moving if we can, but any immediate questions or reactions from the audience? Otherwise, I will introduce Tom. All right, well, thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you.
So let's move on. Tom Chermack from the University of Colorado. As I said, we have a very international panel today, which I think is very exciting. We've got Tom Chermack from the University of Colorado. I think started his academic career in a university I know quite well, Penn State. Moved to Colorado, I think, to experience the mountain air, the skiing and the life conditions, and nobody can blame him for that, right? But Tom's going to talk about scenario planning as a strategic learning system. So he's very interested in the constructs of scenario planning, but then as we apply them to organizations and perhaps how we learn from scenario planning, which is very topical at a time when organizations, as I said, I think are struggling a lot with trying to figure out where they're going in so much uncertainty. So, Tom, over to you.
Thank you. This, for me, is also my first time in Seoul, and I've had a wonderful time. Thank you to the conference organizers here. What a tremendous experience this has been, so thank you very much. I want to start with a question and let you think about this. So here we go. My question for you is, do you think that your organization has an effective approach to thinking about the future? So let's come back to that. I'm very excited today to talk to you about scenario planning, and I think that this is a tool that your organization needs to consider if you have not used this approach to planning in the past. There's a couple other things I want to just throw out in terms of some interesting concepts. In 1989, Arie de Vries, a Dutchman working for Shell Oil, wrote an article in Harvard Business Review called Planning as Learning. His famous quote from that article is this: "Learning, the ability to learn faster than our competitors, may be the only remaining competitive advantage." And I think now more than ever that quote is very pertinent to organizations in terms of solving complex problems. A few other troubling statistics I want to just let you know. A survey of about 2,500 U.S. organizations in 2007 reported, the survey was asking executives about how much time they spent on thinking strategically. And the overwhelming response was that basically executives were saying they spent less than 10% of their time on strategic activities. And to me this is deeply troubling, and I think maybe part of the reason why we've come to such a global financial crisis. So I'm going to talk more about tools I think that can help us prevent this. So far during this conference, Chancellor Schroeder and Director Bergsten both used words that really ring true to me, and these words are turbulence. They used words like dialogue. They used the word tsunami, if you recall. These words are all significant indicators that the environment we're in is more chaotic than it's ever been. So again, I'm very excited to suggest scenario planning as a way to sort of address some of these issues and work together to solve difficult, complex problems. So, having said that, we'll move ahead. This is what I want to spend the time with you today. I want to describe the scenario planning process to you. I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but there's some basic building blocks that we need to cover. I'm going to use a couple of visual allusions to show you how the way we interpret information can lead to some interesting outcomes. I'm going to give you a little bit about the scenario planning process, some examples, and then show you some research studies that are showing some really interesting results about what scenario planning can do for your company. So scenario planning is not new, but what's new are some of the research studies showing that this process really can help people think differently. Okay, this is a sort of generic strategic planning model, which probably looks familiar to most of you. Let me just describe this model briefly. On the left, we start with some analysis of our present situation. Where are we now? What are our goals? What are our initiatives? And we think about what is the future that we want to be? What organization do we want to be in the future? Where are we falling apart right now? And then all we have to do is define these steps to get us from where we are now to where we want to be. The fundamental problem, the fundamental flaw with this kind of thinking is that it assumes the environment stays the same. So as soon as we work on step 1, step 2, we might have a financial meltdown. And then suddenly steps 3, 4, 5, and 6 are completely irrelevant. So this kind of thinking does not account for uncertainty. So let me show you a different approach. Scenario planning says, yes, here's where we are now. But let's admit, particularly these days, that we have no idea what the future is going to be like. We have no idea. It's completely unpredictable. So, instead, we create 4 different stories about how the future could be. And we use those stories to challenge the way people think about our company, about our decisions, about what our strategy should be, and how to come together on a best way to move forward that works in a variety of possible futures. Okay. So scenario planning, as I said, is not new. The concepts came from Shell Oil. This man, Pierre Vac, was a Frenchman. He took some of Herman Kahn's ideas from the Stanford Research Institute and started to apply them to organizational planning. What he found at Shell was that he needed to get managers to talk about what they were worried about. Simply sending people a report with data in it was not having the effect that he wanted it to have. So, I bring up Pierre mostly because he was really one of the founders, but also because when people talk about scenario planning, there's lots of different variations on scenario planning. You can do scenarios in Microsoft Excel. You can simply quantify data in different ways and look at what that tells you. What Pierre was trying to do was entirely different, and it really relied on dialogue and conversation in a turbulent environment. All those words we've been hearing throughout this conference. So getting people to come together and actually talk to each other about pressing issues is the basis of this process. So, having said that, I wanted to clarify. Pierre's primary motive was to shift the thinking. He never had to quantify a dollar amount, because Shell was a very successful company and still is. But he was never pushed to do that. So he was freed up to think about all he worried about was how could he change the way managers saw their jobs, their organization, and the decisions that they faced. That was his motivator. So, having said that, I want to shift into talking about how we see things. So Roger Penrose, mathematician, professor at Oxford, reminds us that when 2 people communicate, the most commonly heard words are, "Oh, I see." But I ask, what is it that we see? What do we see? So I have a few tests to see what you see. So first, this is the best evidence we have from science to tell us how a horse sees the world. As you know, horses' eyes are on the sides of their heads. So they have excellent peripheral vision, but it's very difficult for them to see what's directly in front of them. We are the opposite as people and as organizations. We're so focused on today, next hour, tomorrow, that we forgot about what happens a year from now, what happens 5 years from now, 10, even 20 years from now. Incidentally, if you want to try this, you can put your hands up and sort of obscure your vision a little bit. And at first you might think, well, that's not so bad. But if you walk around for 10 minutes, it's really challenging. But if you stick with it and go beyond 10 minutes, what happens is you will adapt, and suddenly you'll be able to use your peripheral vision more than you currently do, because you don't have to right now. So it's a metaphor. I want you to understand what we're trying to do with scenarios is get people to use the peripheral vision, to look at the fringes, to look at what are the things we're not even thinking about. That's what we're trying to do. Strategic insights come from new perspectives. Here's another one. How many of you believe that the tower on the right is leaning more than the tower on the left? Raise your hands. So most of you. Let me show you. First, I'll make it transparent. And then I'm going to put it on top of the other one. They're exactly the same. Here's my point. This is a very, very simple exercise. We make sense of information through our senses. And if our senses fool us this easily, what about when we make complex decisions about financial markets, governments, policies, countries, nations, organizations, and globalization? So, we need a better way. Okay, so now that we have that point, what we see determines what we do. I have a couple other stories I want to tell. This is a map of the United States. It's from the year 1711, and it was made by a German map maker named Hermann Moll. This map, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the United States, shows California as an island. And here is the Gulf of California. Now, this is 1711. The next map I have is 1747. And they got even more detail. So we're even more sure that there's an island of California. And yet the next map, in 1751, there's the close-up. Now, the way this map was made was early explorers sailed to the Baja Peninsula of California, where the California kind of meets Mexico. And there's a peninsula, and there's water between the two land masses there. Later explorations sailed in by Seattle, Vancouver, the Puget Sound area, and they found islands and water in between these land masses. So when they took their maps back to England and Europe, they put them together and decided there's an island of California, which is all fine, until other explorations used these maps to spread religion inside the United States to the Native Americans who were living there. So what did they do? People sailed up to the coast of California on boats that they could take apart. They brought with them mules, and they packed the boats onto the mules to march them across the state of California so they could put the boats back together and sail across the Gulf of California. Well, if it's at all unclear, there really is no Gulf of California. So these mules carrying boat parts just went up over the Sierra Nevada mountain range and down and across the desert and kept going, and there was no water. So you can see that's kind of a problem. And later explorations said, well, wait, the map is wrong. So we've got to go back to England and tell them, the map is wrong. And they said, no, the map is right, but you're in the wrong place. You see. So my point is this. We have 2 points here. All of us have maps inside our minds that are built of your experiences, everything that's happened to you throughout your life. It's how you make decisions, and you have to have one. But the problem is everyone thinks their map is right. And until we all put our maps together to draw a correct map, we're all going to walk around assuming that there's a Gulf of California or that the financial markets are okay and people can afford to repay their loans or whatever it might be. So scenario planning says we need to leverage the creative capacity of all of our human resources to build the best map we can. That's what we're trying to do. Okay, I want to tell you a little bit about the process. So here's the tool. A lot of this conference has been around we need better ways to solve complex problems. So here's what I'm going to tell you is one way we can think about solving problems differently than we currently are. The first step of any scenario exercise is a general brainstorming, okay? But let me back up. Before we get here, there's all of the organizational diagnosis things that have to happen. So usually there needs to be an initial issue. In modern times, it could be, what are we going to do about the global financial crisis? How can we come together and work towards getting our markets back on track? So there's an issue, and people come together, and there's roles and a team that has to be built, all of the logistical stuff that leads up to this. But we start with a brainstorming exercise. What are the things, what are the factors that are relevant to the issue that we're struggling with? The next step is to get a group of people to rank those issues on their impact on our organization. So if we are in this room, for example, let's say we are IBM, and Peter over here is the CEO of IBM. Would you like to be the CEO of IBM? So we have to all come into the room. We have to have every level, stakeholder, group, every group of the organization has to be represented, or this process doesn't work. At Shell, they were famous for bringing in their cleaning staff and the janitors in to participate in this process. They included everyone. This is how you bring the voices together. And if you give a diverse group of people a list of 100 different forces and ask them to rank them, it will take all day long. It will take a lot of time. People will argue for their point of view and say, this is more important than this. And someone will respond and say, this is more important than this. And guess what? That's the process of building a better map. That's the process of getting a more accurate map. And that's the dialogue that the Chancellor was repeating over and over again 2 days ago. Yesterday, 2 days ago. The dialogue. Think of it as two or multiple brains kind of plugged into each other, sharing what they know. That's what we're trying to do with scenario planning, is share and leverage the collective capital. Once this part of the ranking is done, we ask him to rank again by uncertainty. Now, Pierre, when he was at Shell, he said the true art of scenario planning is to separate predetermined elements from things that are truly uncertain. So think of it this way. What are the things that are just the results of actions that have already been taken, and what are the things that are truly fundamentally uncertain? That's the art of scenario planning, is separating those two things. So think of it this way. If you have heavy rainfall in one spot, odds are you're going to have a flood somewhere else. So if we can understand where's the rain falling, where's the flood going to be, that's predictable. The things that we need to focus on are the things that are truly uncertain. So this is a device for doing that. So once we've done these two ranking exercises, it will take a couple of days, then we can look at the things that people collectively agree are high on uncertainty and high on impact up in this fourth quadrant here. These are known as the critical uncertainties. These are the things with the greatest potential to change our business or to impact our decision or to fundamentally reshape the market, whatever it might be, that we know least about and can say least confidently how they will play out. Okay? Now, I've got some shapes up here, and this part is sometimes tricky. Once you've gotten to this step, you choose two of these critical uncertainties and put them on a 2x2 matrix, and that becomes the scenario development matrix. So let me show you that. You can see here I've chosen two critical uncertainties. I've chosen the triangle and the circle, and I've put them on a 2x2 matrix. When you do this, there are 4 scenarios that naturally come out, 1 in each quadrant. Okay? Now let me show you an example. This is a company I worked with last spring. I've just called it Process Corporation. There are 2 critical uncertainties after going through this multi-day workshop process were, on the one hand, their internal talent management. This is a research and development company. Their job is they bring in federal research funding, and they're trying to get innovative products to market. So far, they've been 100% unsuccessful. So their business model so far is this thing called SBIR funding. In the United States, we have Small Business Innovation Research Funding. It's a government grant that companies can go after. They don't have to do anything except write the proposal. If they win the grant, they get the money. So this company has grown its business on writing proposals and getting money, and writing proposals and getting money. And that's their business loop. Their second issue was talent management. They currently employ 62 PhDs from universities throughout the world. Some of them Princeton, some of them MIT, some of them University of Tokyo, all over the world. They're very smart people. And right now, they've got individual people coming up with very intellectually driven research projects. So on the one hand, if they continue the way they're going to have individual people with their projects. Maybe they win, maybe they get a grant, maybe they get something to market. And on the other side, what if this company were able to create some way to get their people to come together, some kind of more integrated teams working on projects that are related? So their second critical item was this talent management. So you can see we've got 4 different scenarios. So let me just illustrate one so that you understand. Up in this second quadrant here, if the company is able to come together with a clear talent management strategy and get their people working together on innovative projects, and they move away from SBIR funding only, they're able to generate other funding sources. They get some R&D contracts from other major corporations. You understand what I'm saying? Suddenly, they're moving in a successful direction, and they've got everyone involved. So we call that the Airbus scenario. They're taking off, and everybody's going with us. Okay? As opposed to down here, they continue with just one funding source, little productive output, and just individuals working on their own things. So slow boat. They're slowly going exactly where they don't want to go. Okay. So, having said that, that's just a short overview of the scenario development process. It's much more complex than I've presented it here, but I wanted to give you the basic ideas. So some common questions are why 4? So if I said to you, well, let's just quick do a scenario planning exercise. This is how most people think of scenario planning. Well, there's a best case, there's a worst case, and there's the status quo. And guess what? When you do scenario planning with best case, worst case, status quo, nobody learns anything. So we try to get 4, we go through this detailed process to develop really intriguing scenarios. They have to present variables in ways that people don't expect off the cuff, that they don't just easily anticipate. Here's the case where everybody wins, here's the case where we're in real trouble, and here's things stay on as they are. So we do that. 5 tends to be too many for people to manage in their minds. So 4 seems to be the optimal number. Often you see companies using 2. There's this dilemma of having a good scenario, a bad scenario. So as long as you avoid these traps, you can use whatever number is relevant, but 4 seems to be the optimal. I want to give you a couple other examples. These are the famous examples from Shell Oil in 1978 that helped them avert some major oil crises. I'm not sure how well it comes in, but the dotted line is the status quo, and there's the shaded area, and on the top of that shaded area is the best case, and on the bottom is the worst case. Do you see that shaded part? Okay. Well, here's what happened. This is the forecast of oil demand in 1978. So here's what happened. And because Shell had entertained demand down to this 10 line, they credit this to this day with the fact that Shell is still in business as an oil company. Their ability to react more quickly to this turbulent event and sort of save their company. One other example I want to give. I was invited over to Saudi Aramco a couple of years ago, and I bring this one up because it's one of the most unique implementation ideas I've ever seen. They went through a scenario planning exercise, and their two critical uncertainties were oil revenue on the vertical axis and non-oil revenue on the horizontal. Their biggest issues are how much money are we going to bring in from oil and how much from other investments. The executives at Saudi Aramco know very well that oil's lifetime is limited. We're either going to run out or there will be a new technology. It's inevitable. So they have decided to invest in some non-oil revenue things, like they're getting on to the nuclear experiments, some of the hydraulic experiments, and they're trying to look at our energy alternatives. So given these issues, they built scenarios. But what's unique about their exercise was we created rooms. Each of these 4 photos is from a room that was built to reflect the characteristics of the scenario. So we made it into an experiential learning exercise. Over here, this scenario, bitter bread. If the oil revenue runs out, either by oil is replaced with some other technology and they do nothing to get involved, this scenario is the story of the company that's fallen apart by 2050. And we brought sand into this room, and you can see there's sort of graffiti on the wall, and it's a very difficult space. And we put executives into this room and said, tell the story of how this happened. And I have to tell you, it was an amazing experience because I could see them, you know, that Roger Penrose quote, "Oh, I see." I could see them understand that if they didn't decide things differently, that was a real possibility for their company. So, just a couple of examples there. I have a couple of research studies. I'm going to move a little bit quickly through these. So, my research has been, I've come along and said there's a lot of consultants out there saying scenario planning is a great strategic planning tool. And I would agree, but I would also say we don't have any evidence to show you what scenario planning will actually do for you. So I've started to conduct some research, and that's this final segment of the presentation. So my work initially began from a theory perspective, and I wanted to put together a model of how scenario planning works. So the most simple way I can discuss this or present this is as follows. What I'm suggesting here is that scenario planning causes these things in the middle. And they are conversation quality and engagement, organizational, and I would say, and individual learning, decision-making styles, mental models, and leadership support. Scenario planning, I hypothesized, changes these things, which collectively contribute to organization performance and change. This is my theoretical model of how scenario planning works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 3 research studies that look at the relationship between scenario planning and conversation quality and engagement. That's 1. The relationship between scenario planning and organizational learning. That's 2. And the relationship between scenario planning and decision-making style. That's 3. The other 2 I'm working on, but these things take time. So, okay, so first, I wanted to know, does scenario planning have any relationship with the way people talk to each other, their ability to converse, their conversation quality, their level of engagement? So I can't go into great detail, but I was able to find a measure. It was a survey measure, a test, if you will, of people's conversation quality and engagement skills. This test divided skills into two categories. The first are my own individual communication skills, and the second are my interpersonal communication skills. So I was running a scenario planning project in the northeastern US. I had 62 participants, and here's a very basic research design. We did a pre-test, post-test. We did a comparison. A simple t-test showed significant results on both measures, highly significant. What this tells me is simply that these items seem to be related. Now, there's some criticisms that can be made of this research, namely that I don't have a control group, but we'll see as things move on. So anyway, just a short, quick study. We found these things seem to be quite related. The second piece on learning organization characteristics. I used Watkins and Marsick's Dimensions of Learning Organization Characteristics survey. It's been heavily validated, and again, I don't have time to go into great detail, but essentially we're asking people if they perceive their organization to be a learning organization. Okay? And there's these characteristics. Does our organization create learning opportunities, promote inquiry and dialogue, encourage collaboration, empower people? And then these other three relate to the structure. Do they provide strategic leadership, establish systems to share learning, and connect the organization to the environment? So we used this survey as well, the same design, and guess what we found? Every one of them, statistically significant, self-report data. So people who participated in our project said that as a result of the scenario planning exercise, they believe their organization to be more supportive of learning and collaboration, group decision making, and these other items. Still, no control group, and there's some other issues with small sample sizes and whatnot. So I'm going to give you the third and final one, and I'll be wrapping up shortly here. One of the constant claims about scenario planning is that it helps people make better decisions. When you think about how can we measure decision making, psychologists usually give people riddles, but that doesn't really help us understand business decision making. So instead, what I decided to do was look at decision making styles. And again, I was able to find a nice instrument that is heavily validated, suggesting that people make decisions in generally one of 5 different ways. People are rational, intuitive, dependent, avoidant, or spontaneous. So I can give any one of you this test, and it will show me where your tendencies are. Okay? By the way, most people globally tend to be rational decision makers. That's the way we're trained. So let me show you this one. This one was a different company. I did have a control group this time, which helped a lot. And I had 40... Okay? Are we okay? Change mic. Hello? Check. There we go. So we had, in this final study, we had 41 people in the scenario planning exercise, 43 in the control group, which means they didn't get anything. They just went to work as they normally would. We ran the statistics. We did an ANCOVA, and what I want to show you is this. Now, forget everything, but concentrate on this final column here. This is the important one. This statistic is called omega squared, and it's the best indicator of effect size that we have. All of my hypotheses were statistically significant, but what I want to focus on is this. I was suggesting that as a result of participation in scenario planning, people who tended to be rational decision makers before would tend to move into some other category after scenario planning. That hypothesis was supported, and an effect size omega squared of 0.15 is very high. So people shifted away from rational decision making. And guess where they went? They went to intuitive and dependent decision making. Also both significant effect sizes and in the moderately high range. The avoidant and spontaneous categories were very low and sort of negligible. The results are roughly meaningless. But what's interesting about this is that we found people shifting from rational to intuitive and dependent decision making, which is exactly what we purport scenario planning is supposed to do. It makes us make decisions as a collective group, and we use more than simply the forecast reports that are handed to us. We have to have a conversation and make decisions together. So there's promising research here showing that people make changes in the way they make decisions after they go through a scenario planning exercise. So some overall conclusions here. We began with scenario planning as a practitioner's art, and there was no evidence that it really gave me anything as a decision maker. But now we're starting to learn that scenario planning creates learning, and it contributes to an organization that fosters learning. It fosters communication and dialogue, and it changes the way people are making decisions. These are statements that come from the research that we've been doing. The research is never done, and this is sort of the slide that I always have to include. There's more work to be done. I want to study the role of leadership in this process. Any organizational change intervention has to be supported by leadership. The level of engagement of leadership is a very interesting question. Other measures linking this to financial performance. The surveys that I've used have all been linked to financial performance in previous studies. And they've all been found to be moderate proxies for financial performance, but nothing that I can say conclusively there. I need to do some other studies with larger samples and so on. So one sort of closing comment I'd like to make. The Chancellor spoke about the tsunami as an appropriate metaphor for the current business environment. And it raises the question, scenario planning is like flood insurance. You realize you need it after the flood has already happened. So I say now, more than ever, is the time to be thinking about how can we come together and make decisions to solve our current problems. All of the issues that have been listed over the last couple of days, climate change, financial markets, these are all complex issues that are going to require us all coming together and making decisions, building a better map, and moving ahead together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Very interesting discussion. I certainly learned something about California. I think most Californians would actually quite like it if California was an island. We're a little pressed on time. Any quick questions? Otherwise, I'm somewhat inclined to move on to Miha, so that we can finish broadly on time and perhaps save our questions for the end. But any burning question you have for Tom? Otherwise, I will move on. Okay, so our final speaker is Miha Skerlavaj. Skerlavaj, even, yeah. I knew I would get his second name wrong. But as I said before, he's from Ljubljana, the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. Miha his major professional activities are in collaboration with the Center for Management, Development and Training. So he has a very strong interest in things like change management, time management, optimization of labor, and so on. Taken part in a number of projects with users across industries, which is, I think, going to guide us in terms of his presentation. So Miha, let me hand it over to you. I think certainly from our previous conversations, you have a lot of very interesting observations to make. So Miha.
Thank you very much. Just move there. So thank you very much for this kind introduction.
I'd also like to thank the organizers for your warm hospitality. The things that you've done to us, I mean, they will stay in our memory, I believe. And in addition, I'd like to thank all of you for your endurance, and promise to do my best that the count of those awake at the end of this presentation will be about the same as it is right now. But jokes aside, I'd like to talk about the change management and the role that learning-oriented and innovative organizational culture has within this context. Maybe just to understand my background and why I do feel confident to talk about changes. In my relatively short life, and without leaving the country, I have experienced change in the economic system. So I was born in the self-governing socialism and live in a relatively cruel capitalism right now, which is again in the turbulent times, and the values are changing again, if you agree with me. Then the second shift, I was born in Yugoslavia. I live in Slovenia, and which is now part of European Union. In my good 30 years, I changed 4 currencies. The first one, dinar, was the currency with the strong depreciation, strong devaluation. Actually, we cut off like 3 to 6 zeros every now and then. And in Slovenia, we were the first out of those 10 new joint countries that embraced euro. So you can understand what kind of changes we are going through. For instance, at the organizational level, this meant in the early 90s that overnight about 75% on average of the market has been shut down, you know, and companies had to move to different markets. On the other hand, to talk about culture, innovations, and learning, here I have decent amount of research experience, also collaboration with companies in that respect. So I have merged those two to provide some humble, let's say, contribution to this wonderful mosaic of global HRM forum. We have heard a lot about that the changes are only constant, that we live in turbulent times. The other day, actually, I even got the commercial for the motorcycle saying that we live in turbulent times. So it must be true, right? Jokes aside, the more relevant questions in this respect, in my opinion, are first, where to seek for changes in order to be able to maybe predict or to adapt to them. We have heard quite a bit at this conference about it at ex-German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, about what the changes at this global level are. There were some very interesting talks that also covered this issue. You can also have a look at Peter Drucker's management challenges. I mean, we are pretty much aware of changes, and we try to make some typology of what kind of changes are there. A second and more important question is, how can we manage them? So what can we do? And I think that the role of the learning-oriented and innovative culture in this respect is pivotal. It's quite important. And being told that this is a predominantly practitioners conference, of course, I wanted to sum it up in a set of, let's say, managerial toolbox or some, let's say, recommendations for practice. In addition to what we have heard about this conference, I'd like to present you a model of Poell Lodicina. He's a CEO of A.T. Kearney Global, and he predicted, let's say, before the crisis, so the book was published in 2006, he made kind of a typology of where to seek for the changes. And of course, we have experienced in Europe last winter, what does it mean to be dependent upon some energy sources, namely gas that was, the supply of gas was cut off due to the Russian-Ukrainian dispute. There is ongoing debate about the renewable sources. The issue of climate changes is, at one time, it is a threat, for instance, for those that haven't adapted yet, for the companies, I mean, because there are some penalties assigned by Kyoto Protocol and also some European guidance. And on the other hand, it is also an opportunity for the smart companies, right? There are many new jobs that are being created in terms of investing into renewable sources, cleaner sources, in order to reduce the carbon footprint. Then we are part of a global world. I think there's no need to convince all present here in this effect. But then again, we also heard that the international trade has dropped over this last global crisis for 30%. Right? So it's the things that were self-understood 1 year ago maybe do not apply to the same extent right now. Demographics in the western part of the world, you can see aging population, dropping birth rates. Then there are significant portions on this same Earth that have, growing, extremely fast-growing population, difficulties with providing elementary things like water to the same population, and so on. So it's for these people, changes definitely do apply. Then you can see in the area of the new consumer, for instance, in China, there are cases where Web2 tools helped consumers organize and, for instance, meet in front of the same photo store, like 100 of them, and say, listen, if you give us 30% discount, we'll buy from you. So it changes the bargaining power that consumers have. The technology does. Then there are, of course, many other sources of changes. This is not the exclusive list, but at the heart of it all, there is innovation, there is technology, and to this framework, I would add, there are people. The main idea of this talk is that we have always lived in times that have been changing, but the difference right now is that those changes have higher amplitude, and also the frequency of those changes is different. So in order to be competitive for the modern companies, I think one of the areas to look for is a strong and adaptive organizational culture that actually values learning and innovations, and that would be the key idea of this talk. I promise this is the only slide that has word theory inside, and it's just to show you that if you sum up what's out there in terms of for instance, the classical unfreeze, change, freeze model, the model 8S, then learning organization models that are out there, and a few practical models, for instance, the sailboat, captain and crew, and so on, that J.B. Kasarjian uses. And there are other models, of course, but there is one common denominator to them all, that either directly or indirectly they try to find, they stress the importance of appropriate set of values, so which is the, as you might know, the upper level of organizational culture. So Before we go to the how part, I'd like to share some bits and pieces of the research that we have done regarding organization learning culture and regarding innovative culture, also in cooperation with Ji-Hoon Song and Young-Min Lee from Republic of Korea. This is a part of a larger international project that has been going on for about 8 years now in Slovenia, Croatia, Republic of Macedonia, Spain, Republic of Korea, Turkey, Malaysia, and Ohio in the States. And what we have shown, what we have found out here is that basically organizational learning culture has a strong and positive impact on financial performance, on financial performance, and especially through the non-financial performance measured through employees. In other terms, if you invest in a culture that values learning and knowledge, you will have better relationships within and among employees, and it will pay off at the end in terms of value added and other financial indicators. What is also interesting to see is that this organization learning culture has positive impact on customer performance and on supplier performance, but there was no link from those two, let's say, those two stakeholder groups that are usually in front of, in the eyes of managers, in front of the employees, as we have also heard at today's speeches. So there was no direct link to the financial performance, which is surprising, but still proven all over again, all over those 7 to 8 countries. What this figure shows us is that organization learning culture also nurtures the innovative culture, and both directly and indirectly induces the innovations within the organization. And as you know, innovations have, again, positive link to performance. So there's plenty of empirical evidence right now that shows that it does pay off to invest in such initiatives that promote values of learning and values of innovations. And maybe the most relevant question at this point is how to do it. So what is it there in the managerial toolbox that can help managers or leaders to develop such culture? Let me start with metaphors and storytelling, and then I'll show you also on one Slovenian case study the few other tools, for instance, motto of the year, set of values, innovation contests, molecular structure, open learning, and innovation. I tend to call these metaphors and stories grandmother principle, you know, as opposed to mother, for instance, which tells you you should do this, it's good for you. Grandmother usually tells you a story. You know, when I was young, there was this person, and this person has done, you know, a bad thing, and then this what happened to him. So, and somehow, very intuitively, you can understand that she's talking to you. She's not talking about this certain person. She's talking about you, for you, what you should do. But you tend to accept it more than when it's direct order. So the metaphor is we understand, we relate, and we respond to the metaphors and stories. And so let me demonstrate a little metaphor or story that show a desired reaction that people should have with regard to dealing with changes. On your right-hand side, on your left-hand side, you can see a monkey. You might also know that monkeys are being caught by putting bait, sweet, or something similar in a narrow neck bottle, right? So when they would see that, they would extend their hand in the bottle, reach for this bait, and would not, I mean, they would try to pull it out, but they couldn't, so they would get stuck in, they wouldn't let go because, you know, they would cling to their sweet. So this is this very much relates to, I would say, reaction that majority of people have when we deal with changes. We kind of tend to stick to our good old habits, even though they work against us. And on the other side, you would have eagles, and instead of telling stories, I would like to show you a short 3-minute movie clip. So if you can just turn on the lights a little bit. hope that everybody's still awake, right? But just to show you how powerful metaphors are, because from now on, if you show this to your co-workers, and if you talk about monkeys and eagles, everybody knows, you know, what do we talk about. So metaphors are a powerful tool. From now on, I'd like to show you a few practices that Slovenian company called Trimo adopts. It's just to have a short idea, it's a Slovenian multinational company. They work in a construction business, which is typically, let's say, non-knowledge intensive industry, but they are interesting because they apply that kind of HR practices that you would expect in knowledge intensive companies, and they are quite successful with it. They have about 1,200 employees in 28 countries. To put it in your frame of reference, they work for such customers like IKEA, Swedish IKEA. They are part of the renovation of the London Heathrow Airport, so they cover their little niche around the world, and they do it quite well. The tools that they apply, for instance, is motto of the year, right? So they would, as you can see from the slides, it's very often that they stress importance of both learning and innovations and changes as well, right? Innovativeness of processes, innovativeness and creativity, innovativeness for sustainable growth and development of Trimo. So they are also into the green part of business. By the way, one of their major transitions was about 15 years ago, when the leader decided that she will go, you know, through her head against the wall in order to promote the technology that was at the time more expensive. Everybody said you shouldn't do so, but it was cleaner. And in a few years' time, it became evident that it was a good choice, because also the legislation in European Union in this term changed. So it was a good vision that she had, and also speaking from today's perspective, obviously that was the right direction to take. And motto is one of the tools to communicate in which direction changes are needed. Then the second tool that they use is so-called a real or a true Trimo person, so a set of 13 values that they communicate to their future and present employees as the ones that they agree upon. First, there is professional and personal growth as challenge. So being employed in Trimo, as this is challenge for his or her professional and personal growth. So everybody is responsible for his own learning, for his own creativity, for his own innovativeness. And second value that it's important for us today is that the real Trimo person takes initiative in personal, departmental, and company development. So you have responsibility towards the collective, of course. And also they are being quite, let's say, exact about it. So real Trimo person initiate at least one improvement per year, and they have exceeded this number in last years. They also use innovation contests. You have read in the literature, maybe you have read in the literature that there were some criticism against using this kind of tools, but here they work because they are based on non-financial non-financial rewards. And what they do is they give you the they take you to, for instance, to Silverstone to ride a Formula One, or to ride a nuclear submarine, or to go to zero gravity zone, or, you know, a bit wacky rewards, let's say. And it's also called award for the boldest idea. So they actually manage to attract ideas that sell that sell to the market, and they get them from everybody. For instance, in the next slide, I hope you can see, but this is so-called fluorescent facade. And actually one apprentice that was in the company for about half a year gave this idea because she was observing her little child having a spoon which color changed according to the temperature. So she got the idea that it would be kind of nice to have also the facade which color changes according to the angle of the sun. And it sells well. So I guess it was not just the boldest idea, but also quite a commercially successful idea. Then they also tend to involve different kind of let's say communities, stakeholders. They have relatively flat organizational structure for the 1,200 employees, and they really invest a lot of their times and effort to connect, to reach out, to connect to a wider community, to suppliers, to customers, institutes, banks, you name it. I mean, everybody that has some idea or piece of knowledge that comes handy to Trimo, they try to reach out for them. And just as an example of open innovation and learning, they every year, I think it's now it will be 8th year in a row, they have a tender of research awards, and basically they offer it to students of different levels in all the markets at which they are present. For all kind of ideas that might be interesting for them. And and this is one good example, I believe, how to network with academia, how to use that triple helix, way of thinking. Then this is in Tivoli Park in Ljubljana. They also, one important audience for them are architects. Basically, being business to business company, architects are their really important hand as a sales channel, and also at the other hand they are very important as idea generators. So they also have architectural awards in order to network with professionals. And of course, just to wrap it up, this is not an exclusive list. I'm sure everybody in the audience, provided that we would have time, could contribute some idea of his own, so we could do a little session of open creativity, open innovation of our own. But to sum it up, the idea of this talk was that learning and innovation culture is one of quite vital or viable responses to changes that companies are facing nowadays. And I also gave you a little bit insight into the empirical data that shows that it does pay off, that there is a performance link behind it. And I'll just like to wrap it up with Kamsamnida. Thank you. Hvala.
Thank you very much, Miha. And we do have a couple of minutes at the end here for questions. I'm certainly, Miha, very passionate about the things you talk about creating the right sort of culture to encourage change. One of the things that you perhaps didn't talk about so much, and there were a lot of things, that expectations on individuals and so forth, and how they are seeking to perhaps develop the attitudes of people differently. But what role do you think measurement plays in that? In other words, are they encouraging people to do these things because they're measuring and setting objectives for them to do it, or is it more informal?
You would have other examples, I believe, from the multinational companies that show that if you want to measure too much and then, God forbid, tie it to financial rewards, that you would have a backfire. So they don't do that. Those values and culture is number one tool, of course. but they have some, let's say, their culture is both innovative and it is efficient as well, you know. They don't have time to lose. They want results quite fast, and so far they managed to got them.
Yeah, which is impressive. I mean, I think as we wrap this up, there are a number of interesting connections between the three presentations. I mean, clearly, the first is this notion of learning and collaboration, that whether it's through scenario planning, through the learning networks that Rob was talking about, or indeed through culture change and transformation, the diversity of experience, the diversity of perspectives, and getting people to work together with these differing perspectives, learning from each other, creating cultural change, are absolutely fundamental, I think, to success. I mean, what is interesting to me as a consultant is because I got 3 academics, and academics want to find the empirical proof as to why these things are good. I absolutely know these things are good. They are good things for businesses to be doing. They are things that leaders everywhere should do, and we don't always need the empirical evidence. But anyway, let me, I don't know if, sorry, Tom, you had a comment.
I just wanted to respond to that and say my general take on integrating these presentations is Rob's coming at from the individual point of view, and I kind of coming from the organizational point of view, and we're both coming together to create this sort of culture of learning and collaboration. It seems that we're all getting at the same outcome, which is continuous learning about what's going on.
I think that has clearly been a theme of the forum, and I was taken by the comments of the professor from the previous session, and certainly my experience of Korean culture and Korean organizations is this is something you believe in very strongly, in education and in continual learning. And that is a very, very powerful attribute. And I think you're right, Tom. I mean, the connection is certainly around these sort of notions of individual learning, collective learning, collaborative learning. And in a world that is so uncertain, these become critical attributes of success, whether you're talking about it as a level of society or at a level as an organization. And I think it's been very interesting to hear this kind of dialogue. But with the remaining few minutes, any questions from the audience for any of the presenters? I know we're right at the end of the day, but yes. And perhaps you just briefly introduce yourself and where you're from.
Thank you very much for your presentations. My name is Young-Ah Kim, and I am working for Cheongho-Comnet. I think those three presentations have similar things, and I would like to ask, how is that way that I, as a training manager, I am afraid of. Should I make a systemized something to make people voluntarily participate in that kind of programs, or did they voluntarily participate in your programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. It's almost back to this measurement point. To what extent will people volunteer and naturally do these things versus the structures and processes you have to put in place to encourage them? Yeah, Rob.
My answer would be depending on the type of company I think that you work in. That idea of coming up with tools would fit very well in some companies, but in other companies it would not really fit very well. On the other hand, it's also interesting that you say, I think you said, to make people participate voluntarily. That seems to be a contradiction in terms of a sort. But on the whole, I think if you mean try to create conditions for people to take on more initiative, that would probably work well in any company, because you give it to the employees, and of course, like we said before, they will need guidance also. But my idea would be that in some companies that is easier to implement, and depending also on the culture, than in some other companies where people are used to being told what to do and wait for things to happen. So it depends.
something to it. First, I'd like to tell you a joke and then an answer. First, some of you might have heard it. You know what's the best? How does the best economist look like? He only has one hand, you know, because he cannot say on one hand and on the other. So it always depends, of course. But to come to the point, you might refer to the research that Hubert Sanonge made, and they were differentiating among different types of learners, if you want, and there will be about, I don't know, 10 to 15% of active learners, and those are the ones for the voluntary HR practices. The vast majority of employees are so-called passive learners, so they work by, you know, they need some kind of I don't know, support or some kind of system, and they see this path dependence between the HR practice and the result of it, right? Financial or non-financial. And there are, of course, about 10 to 15% of block learners, so whatever you do, it doesn't help. And to put it in our context, if you're able to attract, let's say, majority of those active learners, then you're okay. You don't have to have systems, but in reality, of course, you also get people by normal distribution, so you would have also passive learners, and then they need some kind of system after all.
Yeah, I mean, the only other observation I'd make, I think to create a learning culture, to do a lot of the things that we talked about, has to start at the top. You cannot create a culture if the top management and top leadership don't believe in it. And the Trimo story is good because quite clearly the top management believe in the kind of things they're trying to do, creating that kind of culture. And it is absolutely essential if you want to create a learning culture and encourage employees to participate in learning or to give of their knowledge to others. You know, that culture has to start from the top, and it has to be believed in by top management, and they have to keep repeating it, and they have to reward in various ways the right behaviors. And I think there are some very important blocking and tackling in doing that from the top. Yeah, question in the middle there.
I'm Ji-Ho Kim, an investor doing business as a synergy investor. I'd like to. I got the impression that all of the speakers do so-called out-of-the-box thinking. So I'd like to hear from all of you. Where do you usually get your innovative or inspiring ideas? On the light of the fact that the multidisciplinary approach is being increasingly emphasized these days.
Good question.
I can start from people that are absolutely not like me, which brings us to social networks and which brings us to diversity. On a personal note, my background was banking and finance, which is economics, right? Then I moved to business informatics, and my PhD was in management and organization, and who knows what I'll do in the future. And I really like to talk with people that, I don't know, with architects, with artists, with musicians, with athletes, I mean, whoever has something else to say. So I would say through the networks of different people. Yeah.
I find that a very difficult question because I can't really answer it very well. I mean, I can answer it, but it is not very planned or structured in any way. I think my best ideas happen when I don't notice them, or when it suddenly dawns on me in the shower or on my bicycle. We have a flat country. When I'm not really thinking about stuff and then suddenly it hits me. So that's not very helpful because you cannot really manage that. But I do think that it can happen because, like the previous speaker, I do engage in discussions. I go to other people. Not always at that moment does the moment of truth come, but certainly at some point later it will, usually. But so you have to do all these things and then wait for things to happen. That's the best I can do, I'm afraid.
I'll try. Yeah, I think I said in my presentation, I deeply believe that the best insights come when you see the same situation in an entirely different way. So anything you can do to make yourself terribly uncomfortable will likely be good for you. Seriously, I mean, one of the biggest things that I think of is travel to different countries. And for example, when I get home, I'll be very excited for 3 days, and then I'll relax, and a day later I'll say, when do I get to go on my next trip? I mean, you become addicted to learning from different perspectives, and coming here to Seoul is an example of an experience like that. So the more uncomfortable you are, I tell my students, the more you're learning.
No, I'd agree with that. I've had an opportunity to travel throughout my career, and I agree, talking to artists and people from different fields is important. I think that my final observation on it would be keeping an open mind, which very much plays into some of the things that Tom was talking about, perception. You know, we do filter the world through our own experiences and own perceptions. So it's very important to keep an open mind. And in many of the subjects which we're debating here, there are no absolutes, which is why sometimes challenge on the empirical evidence. They're not always easy to find absolutes when we're talking about culture and organization and people. They're complex things with many variables and many things that affect them. So keeping an open mind, I think, is absolutely essential. And we probably need to get on to another question. Yeah, any other questions? Observations? Yeah, at the front here. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the speech. I work under a government, a public organization, and since 1990s, Korean government has introduced many new practices under the name of new performance management. And we introduced many new systems. Mm-hmm. But I won't say most, but some of the systems and new institutions that we introduced did not adapt it to our culture. Mm-hmm. So in case we also introduced a career development program, which is not really working under the government. Yeah. And we try to revive that program. And what we see is many people feeling resistance against again pushing that system again. So we have, in case of this resistance, do you have any recommendations or any experience about this?
Well, it's a change management issue to a degree. I mean, Miha, do you have some observations? I mean, I have some thoughts. But maybe I'll hand this to you. Yeah.
I have one. Yeah, well, from this learning path theory, I would argue that, but this is a theoretical answer, I don't know if it's any help, but people will be resistant if their impression is that this program, this intentional learning program, does not take into account their learning path, which may mean the themes that they are interested in, which may mean their learning style, so the way they learn, and it may be all these things that are attached to how and why and what people learn about. So the task for any HRD person, be it at the government level or at shop floor level in an organization, is to analyze what are the current learning paths, learning styles, learning themes that people are working from, and to try and take that into account in any program. Of course, this is difficult because people have very different learning paths. So at some point, maybe the HRD person should say, all these people should not be in the same program because it's too hard to differentiate among all these different learning paths. But that would be my answer. Try to make a diagnosis as an HRD person of what kind of people are supposed to be in your program in terms of their learning paths, and then try to come up with an intentional program that takes that into account, but also offers them opportunities to place their own emphases. That I think is very important to avoid resistance, looking at it from that angle.
Yeah, and perhaps just building on that thought, because I agree, I think you have to personalize some of this. I mean, it's hard to answer the question directly because we don't know all of the context that you're describing, but in the end, really successful change happens because people pull that change. They personalize it, they believe it's important to them, versus push. And of course, in organizations, you see a lot of change being pushed from the top, and the resistance comes in the organization when people say, well, I don't understand how that's relevant to me. Why is that important to me? You haven't taken account of my personal issues, my personal circumstances, learning styles, context, culture, whatever it might be. So I think it is very important, and it's classic marketing theory in a way, which is to understand your audience and understand, therefore, how you get your audience to pull this, and it's not just a push, and internalizing it. So they're standard practices around change management, which I think apply whether you're talking about at a society level or inside an organization.
Just a quick add, and involving the audience whenever and wherever possible, because this kind of accelerates the possibility that you will accept change if you're being asked at the right time, what do you think about it? So it's, again, we are at dialogue.
Any other questions? Yeah, perhaps time for one more.
Hi, my name is Christine. I'm working in a local IT company. Mm-hmm. And I was very impressed and also interested in scenario planning that you presented before. But I'm just wondering that if we want to implement the scenario planning successfully, what kind of steps do we need to follow? And is there anything that we need to be careful for, doing the scenario planning?
And any other things which are important in engaging people in scenario planning? No.
I would say we've touched on this leadership issue already, and I would agree that if the leadership, they have to not only be supportive, but they also have to be involved. So if they're just saying, oh, we love it and you all go do it, I think that sends the wrong message. They have to be in those ranking workshops. They have to be in the meetings. The other barrier, I think, is going to be culture, because this process is based on dialogue, and people have to be able to disagree, have conversations. Sometimes there are arguments, and some cultures that can be really uncomfortable. So sort of the prerequisite, I would say, is people have to be willing to entertain the possibility that they're wrong first. I mean, that to me is a prerequisite to scenario planning. But those are two really critical ones, just to start.
Humility and leadership is probably part of what you're talking about. But anyway, I think we do need to draw it to a close. We're a few minutes over. But thank you very much for staying to the end. Appreciate your attendance. And Gaham Sanida.